Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, May 2nd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 124 days. The game against Michigan in 208 days. Not very long after we finished recording Monday's Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning episode, Ohio State wide receiver Kaleb Brown entered the transfer portal just under the wire before the midnight deadline. So today we're going to be talking about wide receivers. We did a whole show on Kaleb Brown's departure on the Buckeye Weekly feed that dropped on Monday morning, so you can find that already if you want to do a deep dive on Kaleb Brown, his departure, what it all means. Today we're going to be talking about the rest of the Ohio State wide receiver core. What is left behind Kaleb Brown, which the depth there is going to be part of the conversation about why Kaleb Brown left. We're going to be talking to our good buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, I guess, this is a little bit of a weird situation with Kaleb Brown where he ended up leaving, and he didn't necessarily fit the traditional model of the guy who leaves where there's really no clear path to the playing field. This was one where it felt like he was someone who was probably headed towards a bigger role with Ohio State, but maybe just not as soon as he was hoping.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And a victim of the depth chart where other guys get passed by younger guys. I don't know that necessarily that had happened just yet with Kaleb Brown if we're strictly talking about slot receivers, because he played quite a bit running with the ones and twos when we saw him in the spring, playing a lot and getting his opportunity. But then in the spring game, you saw the three starters being Marvin Harrison, Jayden Ballard, and freshman Carnell Tate. But a guy who I guess finally, not finally, but kind of quickly made a decision, okay, I need to go somewhere else to get some playing time. And I think it was going to be difficult for him to get on the field as a receiver this year. I think there was an opportunity for some special teams return game stuff, but Ohio State has not really put much focus on that over the years, so I don't know how much faith he could have put in that. Like, oh, well, you're gonna crank up the return game to 11, something like that. I don't know that that's the best way to convince a wide receiver to stay when they wanted to catch the ball and they want to be involved, and that's why he came to Ohio State. And I think another thing, you consider what Ohio State slot receivers normally do, and they generally lead the Buckeyes in receptions, and they put up big numbers. And so you come in with that expectation, and when it's not realized your freshman year, which you kind of understand, but you also see your sophomore year, you're at your freshman year, like, I don't see this happening. And that's the same kind of time where Jackson Smith-Njigba as a sophomore, his second year, is catching 95 passes for 1,600 yards and blowing up. And, even Marvin Harrison as an outside receiver as a sophomore, and Emeka Egbuka last year as a sophomore on the inside. Like, look what they were able to do. And Kaleb Brown's not on that level. And I can hear Brian Hartline saying everybody has their own path, everybody has their own journey, talking about Jayden Ballard, Julian Fleming. And Kaleb Brown does have his own path, his own journey, and it's going to be somewhere else.
So now let's talk about the guys who are going to be here this fall. And I think we probably need to start with I guess we're going to agree on who we need to start with here. That is Marvin Harrison Jr. He is someone who came in as a true freshman. You look at his 2021 stats, and in your head, he probably had about 12 touchdowns in his freshman year. He had 3. They were all in the Rose Bowl. You remember all 3 of them, I'm guessing. But last year definitely took that next step, took it to the next level. I think what would Marvin Harrison and Jackson Smith-Njigba have looked like playing next to each other for a full season is going to be one of the great unanswered questions in Ohio State football history. But he feels like, assuming he's healthy this fall, he feels like one of the surest things for Ohio State on offense, that just throw the ball in his general direction and good things are going to happen.
Yeah, 77 catches last year, 1,263 yards, 14 touchdowns. And that's splitting a lot of time with other talented receivers in terms of targets. And a guy is just, I would agree with you, just automatic. You can set it and forget it, basically, except they're not just going to set him and forget him. They're going to move him around. Like, they're going to constantly be putting him in places to make the life of the defense miserable, including we saw him in the slot quite a bit in the spring. And not that he's going to be a full-time slot guy, but is going to be moving around and playing those positions. And I also think that's perhaps another reason why Kaleb Brown decided there's even fewer opportunities for me this year. But a guy that defenses are concerned about. Watching the NFL draft this past weekend, and they're talking about Yes, Marvin Harrison got the best of this cornerback who was just drafted in the second or first or whatever round, but don't feel bad. Everybody got beaten up by Marvin Harrison. So it was never used as a knock. Hearing NFL guys already talking about Marvin Harrison has been interesting. And of course, we said it here. I think that Harrison would have been a top 3 pick based on what we were hearing this year if he was in the draft. So you put all of that math together, and yes, it equals 1. He is 1 of 1.
Yeah, and that's one of those things you hear people talk about 1 of 1 a lot, and it's like, not everyone can. Whoever scored 2 touchdowns last week in the NFL, everyone's like GOAT emoji. Like, no, okay, that actually stands for something. It's an acronym. Not everyone who scores 2 touchdowns can be the GOAT. Marvin Harrison is probably very legitimately in the 1 of 1 conversation. If he is healthy this fall and plays a full season, that it is going to be very exciting to see what he can do, and also how defenses try to lock him down. Because as you said, even if you have a first round talent corner, that's not necessarily something you can win, a battle you're going to win 1-on-1. So that's Marvin Harrison, probably obviously the most hyped of the players on Ohio State's offense this year. Next up, I wanted to get to the guy who I think might be one of the more underappreciated members of the Ohio State wide receiver core, and that's Emeka Egbuka. And he's someone, he came in as a 5-star wide receiver. It's not like he was this unheralded 3-star. And he is definitely someone who everyone knows his name, everyone appreciates him. But when you're on a team with Marvin Harrison, it's Marvin Harrison and the rest. Everything after Marvin Harrison is and the rest. And Emeka Egbuka last year, 74 catches, 1,151 yards, 10 touchdowns. Also had 11 rushes for 87 yards, another couple touchdowns, 12 total touchdowns on the year, 1,238 total yards from scrimmage last year. He feels like someone who, we didn't really get to see him at all this spring. He was out for the whole spring. Julian Fleming was out for the whole spring. He just feels like someone who is sort of, maybe like D. Miller when you're across from David Boston, where the other guy is just such a force of nature that you almost get a little bit overlooked at times, and he could be on the verge of a very big season this year as well.
Yeah, another guy popping up in mock drafts as a first rounder. It's interesting because he has played outside, he's played inside, did really well in the slot, and I think what is now the 9th Ohio State receiver with a 1,000-yard season. So, that's very select company, and he is part of it. And you look at the way he finished the season last year: 9 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown against Michigan, 8 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown against Georgia. Sure, 2 catches for just 6 yards against Northwestern. Are we going to hold that against him? He was playing in a hurricane. But we saw it as a freshman. He had like the 91 yarder or whatever. The catch and run. He was the number 1 receiver in that class, in that 2021 class, and he is such a tremendous athlete. He would have been like the number 1 free safety if you wanted to play defense as well. So a guy that would be the guy if not for Marvin Harrison. And yeah, I definitely agree. He's underrated by people, and he gets lost in the glow, I think, of Marvin Harrison. You can't see his own sunlight coming, but a guy who is tremendously talented. And again, when you are the slot receiver at Ohio State, you are the focal point of that passing game. So don't think he's just going to be 60 or 50 catches. Like he will have another 70 catch season, if not more, assuming the quarterback situation is what we have come to expect at Ohio State. But there are very few players he could be second fiddle to. I'll just say that.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting that. The third starting wide receiver returning is Julian Fleming. He's someone who, again, was the number 1 wide receiver in his class. And he's had a little bit more, a little bit of a winding road. Brian Hartline's old line about everyone has their own journey. There's been a few more twists and turns for Julian Fleming, a lot of them involving injury. He's never played a full season at Ohio State, played 11 games last year. When he was on the field, he was effective and impactful, had 5 catches for 71 yards against Georgia in that Peach Bowl loss. He's someone who, if he's on the field, this is a contract year for him. If he can stay healthy, show that he can put together a full healthy season, they can't double everyone, Tony. And you get the sense that they're probably going to be doubling Marvin Harrison a bunch, and they're going to probably be trying to bracket Emeka Egbuka as well. So this is a real opportunity for Julian Fleming potentially this year, if he can put a full healthy season together finally, to make that case for another guy towards the top of that NFL draft in a year from now.
Yeah, he missed the first 2 games last season. Then in his first 5 games, averaged about 70 yards receiving per game and scored 6 touchdowns in those 5 games. And it looked like he was beginning to realize the enormous potential that was there. And then over his final 6 games, I think he finished with maybe 200 yards receiving and no touchdowns. And injuries, the shoulder, I think, was something that was bothering him, and whatever else he needed to get cleaned up over spring. Clearly, he was dealing with that. So there are only so many opportunities, so many footballs to be thrown around. But when do you put your third best receiver corner on him? Like, how do you choose to defend him? And he's an effective guy. He will be a draft pick. And just what kind of season he has this season will determine how high. But like he would be like Emeka Egbuka. He would be the guy somewhere else, and that's there will be games where he is the guy for Ohio State, I think, this year. And same with Emeka Egbuka. I think there will be games where without him, you might not have won.
And you get to that's the top 3. And then after that, it gets kind of interesting because you got guys that get fill different roles, and you got young guys who might be pushing to jump over older guys on the depth chart. Let's first talk about Xavier Johnson. We saw him a little bit in the first half of spring. Then he had a leg injury and then missed the second half of spring, was scooting on a scooter during the spring game. He's someone who is, you want to talk about a unique journey. Came to Ohio State as a walk-on, passed up scholarship offers from other Power 5 schools to come to Ohio State as a walk-on, and just kind of believed in himself. He shared a story this spring about, sort of his confidence wavering. Do I really belong here? And Urban Meyer going up to him and saying, hey, whatever number he was wearing there, hey, number whatever, basically, you're doing a great job, keep it up, essentially. And that was all he needed, and stuck it out, and is now on scholarship, and has really turned into a very unique weapon for Ohio State. There's a lot of different wide receivers and a lot of different body types. He brings something pretty unique to that room.
Yeah, he definitely does. And he's a bigger guy, listed to 6'2", 215, but played 13 games last year, had 13 catches, 12 rushes, 12 kickoff returns. When he carried the ball, he averaged 12 yards a carry. When he caught the ball, he averaged like 11.6 yards per carry. So the ways that they used him were pretty good, pretty creative, and very effective. And he was an incredibly valuable member. And whenever he needed to be called on, he was ready. And I still remember talking to Tony Alford, running backs coach, maybe in fall camp, saying, because at this point, Xavier Johnson had played running back for a couple of years, then moved to receiver and was looking for playing time this year. This was going to be a good year for Xavier Johnson. He was going to play. He was going to be a part of the offense as a receiver. And then I asked Tony Alford, what would happen if you went to Xavier Johnson and said, X, we need you back at running back? And Alfred said Xavier Johnson would just be like, when do you need me? Give me a playbook. Let's meet after practice. Let's meet after school. I can come to your house, get me up to speed on what I need to know and what has changed, and we'll go from there.
And you probably remember 2 touchdowns that he scored last year through the air. Big one against Notre Dame in the, I think, third quarter of that game. That was really a decisive touchdown there. Also had a big touchdown against Georgia with that nice spin move right on the goal line. Those are the only 2 touchdowns he scored through the air all year. But it's interesting when, normally you get a guy who's got 2 touchdowns and it's like, well, okay, it's a young guy and he scored them against Youngstown State and Western Kentucky or whatever. Those are 2 of the biggest games of the year, and that's when they went to Xavier Johnson. So that's a little intriguing to me as well. Next guy up is Jaden Ballard, and he's someone who I think before the spring we sort of had circled as this is a big spring for this guy because he feels like he's still relatively young, but he's also was the third wide receiver in the same recruiting class as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, who we're talking about as the savvy veterans who could be off to the NFL this time next year. Jaden Ballard has been there the same amount of time, and we're talking about him as the promising young up and comer. So it's a little weird, but he's someone who felt like it wasn't incredibly dominating. He didn't absolutely steal someone's starting job this spring. But I feel like based on what we saw from him this spring, he's someone I'm expecting to play a much bigger role this fall.
Yeah, a guy that when he came in is just viewed as this deep guy, this runs deep routes, has the deep speed, the Devin Smith comparisons, the jersey number, the same high school, that sort of thing. But this spring, what caught my eye the most was all of the short routes that he was running and doing it effectively, catching quick outs and moving the chains and getting first downs. Now, I will say we also saw the same thing with Devin Smith, like in his third and fourth year, where they're trying to force this short thing to happen. But with Jaden Ballard, I mean, it looked good. It looked effective. And he's just a guy with 9 career catches in his career, and 4 of those and over 100 yards against Toledo last year in the 77-point win. But now is basically his time, and he looked every part a starter in the spring. I thought he was very effective. What we saw him doing, and becoming a more complete player, a more confident player, and really growing with all of the cross training that Brian Hartline has had him doing.
Yeah, it feels like there's a natural role for him, but you can't be the guy who they don't play a lot of one-trick ponies at Ohio State. You can't be what Urban Meyer would call a hood ornament. That's you've got to be able to do a little bit of everything, and so just getting him more comfortable with all of the other stuff feels like that gets him a lot closer to the field. Last up, of the 6 guys I wanted to talk to you about specifically, I know we had high expectations for Carnell Tate coming into the spring. And then Carnell Tate kind of exceeded the high expectations coming into the spring. I don't think he's a starter this fall, right?
Tom, I agree. I don't think either. But I do expect this to be. I expect him to play, but I think with the nuances and the experience that Julian Fleming has, I think maybe the better question is, where in that 6 is Carnell Tate? Where is he in that 4, 5, 6? Is he 4? Is he 5? Is he 6? And will he stay there? And I feel like one of the reasons we see Marvin Harrison moving around from position to position is that allows them to get some snaps for Carnell Tate out wide at the X. So if you're already kind of moving guys around so that you can get a freshman on the field, I am going to be incredibly interested to see how he grows throughout the season. And we see those freshmen grow, whether it's Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson. They ease them in, and then at some point you are your co-starter by November. Like, it doesn't matter if you're in there or Julian Fleming or whomever. Like, it's not a strange thing to see you in there in the fourth quarter with 3rd and 7, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if he starts a game this year. I am reasonably confident there is a game against a decent opponent, not Youngstown State. There's a game where he's getting 20, 25, maybe 30 snaps, where he's, very much a rotational player at some point this season against an opponent with a pulse. So, yeah, he seems like someone where you might not, maybe he doesn't quite get there this year, and, that is not any kind of a big concern. He feels like he's someone I would feel pretty confident in penciling in as a potential starter for 2024 once you potentially lose Egbuka, Fleming, Johnson, Marvin Harrison. There's going to be a lot of starting spots available 2024. It feels like you can kind of pencil him in already for one of those maybe. But yeah, definitely a very, very high ceiling there. And, the intriguing thing about the 2023 recruiting class is we saw some impressive stuff out of Noah Rogers this spring. We saw Bryson Rogers look pretty solid. And then the highest ranked of those 2023 wide receivers, Brandon Innes, not even on campus yet. And, it feels like there's not going to be a lot of snaps to go around for those guys. And I think if you ask people to project, they're going to say, 200 yards for each of those guys. It's like, no, that is not how that ever works out for the whatever 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever wide receiver. But those are all guys who feel like this time next year, we're talking about multiple of those guys as potential starters or rotational guys.
Yeah, and are you going to be surprised to see a game in the Big Ten at some point this season where Carnell Tate has 2 touchdowns and is kind of like the talk of the game, where he looks like he's a veteran? That's not going to surprise me at all. But we always have to dial down the expectations for freshmen, especially when we talk about 4 true freshmen in Ohio State history have ever caught more than 30 passes. So but still, that's the baseline I'm putting Carnell Tate at right now. Like, will he be number 5? And I kind of feel like I'm not going to be surprised if he is at all.
Yeah, and I mean, do you remember off the top of your head who the other 4 were?
Chris Carter, David Boston, Garrett Wilson, and somebody else. So maybe it's only 3.
It might be only 3. But yeah, I mean, just the names you're talking about there give you a sense for the type of player that it takes to get to that level, to be able to be a 30 reception as a true freshman kind of guy at Ohio State. And, this is not a year when the depth chart is wide open. You've got 3 returning starters, so you really have to earn your way up there. The quality of that, the other 5 guys in that sort of top 6 that we talked about is what makes me think maybe he doesn't get there, but it's certainly a viable conversation. It is not a wide open depth chart like it has been at times in the past. But yeah, he's going to be someone to watch this year. Marvin Harrison, going to be someone to watch this year. Write that down. Exclusive, must credit Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning podcast. Marvin Harrison, good at football. Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming. I mean, it is going to be an intriguing year. And whoever Ohio State has winning that quarterback job, going to have some weapons out there. So we will be talking much more about a bunch of the rest of the spots around the field in the coming days and weeks as we sort of wrap up spring ball. Now that the transfer portal is closed, we can kind of have a little bit of a spot where, okay, now we sort of know where things stand in different spots. So we'll be talking about a bunch of different positions there. We're talking about a bunch of different stuff at BuckeyeHuddle.com. It has been a very busy last week or so in the transfer portal, a very busy week in the recruiting realm as Ohio State's landed commitments. Ohio State's landed a couple different guys through the transfer portal, has another guy potentially on the way in the next week or so. So you're going to want to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com to be on our Huddle board, get access to all of our great information from all of our insiders. Mark and Alex absolutely killing it on the recruiting beat and on the transfer beat. Talked about this on the show yesterday. Man, those 2 guys, they sure do seem to know a lot of people and have a lot of good information about a lot of people from a lot of different areas, don't they? Very interesting how that works. You can get access to those guys, all of their great information. Get a chance to ask them. You got questions? They'll answer them. Today, Tuesday, is the day that Mark does his all-day chat on our Huddle board, so sign up today. You can talk to Mark all day long today if you want to. And also you can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, and our new channel, youtube.com/@CFBPlaybook. Lots of great X's and O's content, bunch of NFL draft content if you want to go back and watch some of that stuff. And then those guys are going to be at camps. Mark is going to be at a camp, I think, later today, and so we'll probably have him on to talk about that a little later on in the week. But recruiting, NFL draft, transfer portal, all that great stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.